There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. All right, special guest today for Stephen and myself here on the podcast.
Yes, sir.
Quick turnaround, too. I reached out and Tom was ready to go, so we fit him in early this week. So coming to us from near Minnesota, he's on the boundary of Voyageurs National Park. He is also the project lead of the Voyageurs Wolf Project. He is Tom Gable. Tom, pleasure to meet you. How's everything going in Minnesota?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And everything's going good in Minnesota. We got fresh 10 inches of snow last week, and winter's setting in. So it's that time of year where things start getting cold and we're out of the field. And so I'm happy with that right now.
Yeah, that is exciting. I hope we can send some snow this way, please. We have a little snow, a little rain. Anything in the mountains would be fantastic.
Sure.
We're still in the 70s, and I'm... please, just for everybody's... You went to Hope College. You got your bachelor's in biology. You got your PhD at the University of Minnesota. How long have you been with the Voyageurs Wolf Project, and when did you become project lead? What was the lead up to you joining this? Because I read your bio, and it seemed like you had your connections with wolves or with the wild out there in Minnesota at an early age. So how did that all come about?
Sure. So it's sort of a twisting, winding story, which I suppose is true of a lot of wolf biologists. There's not really a straight and narrow path that gets you to sort of into the wolf world, so to speak. But I had known for a long time that I was really interested in studying wolves. Starting from when I was younger, our family has a cabin in Ontario near Killarney Provincial Park, and that's where I saw my first wolf in the wild, and I'd see tracks and scat, and I was just sort of captivated by that. And particularly captivated by the fact that I knew wolves were out there, but I couldn't see them. I couldn't see them very often, didn't know what they were doing. So I was really interested in studying that more. And so the way I got involved with the Voyageurs Wolf Project, I should say, the project kind of started when I started doing my graduate work, so to speak. So from 2012 to 2014, Voyageurs National Park had started to monitor the wolf population in the area, because that's when wolves had been delisted in 2012. And so they were trying to monitor the population, try to get estimates of how many packs there were, how many wolves are in each pack, what were the wolves dying from, things like that. So a lot of basic monitoring. And then in 2014, I accepted a master's position with Dr. John Brugink and Dr. Steve Windells at Northern Michigan University. And what I was told when I took that master's position is I could do anything I wanted for my master's as long as it dealt with beavers in Voyageurs National Park. And so I had to think about, okay, beavers are cool, but I really wanted to do wolf stuff. But I was still happy to be in a master's program. That was still a big deal. But then I started thinking about it and reading, and it sort of occurred to me that, oh my goodness, wolves eat beavers frequently in a lot of boreal ecosystems, and particularly in places like Voyageurs National Park, where there's a ton of beavers around. And yet wolf-beaver interactions has gone almost entirely sort of unstudied. So I pitched this idea to my master's advisors, like, why don't we look at this? And they're like, sounds great, And really, I was kind of cut loose, I guess, to start studying wolves in the summer of 2015. And my main goal was to study wolf-beaver interactions, but I was really interested in trying to learn as much as I possibly could. So I started looking at all sorts of other things. And luckily, I had advisors who gave me a lot of latitude to sort of study what I wanted to. And so that allowed us to start looking at like wolf dens and wolf reproduction, and trying to find kills of not only beavers, but of other prey that wolves are killing and consuming. And so we basically tried to gather as much information as could in that first year. And then the project has just sort of continued along, sort of building off of that foundation from 2015. It's become a little bit more formalized and things like that. And so in that sense, the project's been very sort of almost organic, I guess you could say, in the sense there was never this established, we are starting the Voyageurs Wolf Project and I'm going to come join in this capacity. It's kind of like we are a bunch of different people who were studying wolves and trying to understand it, and things got sort of bigger and bigger and more formal with time. And then obviously I finished my master's in 2016. 2017, I started a PhD, and then I just finished that last year. And so it's sort of been this progression for both me personally and for our project as a whole. And now I kind of feel like now we're sort of really operating sort of as a well-oiled machine, but there's a lot of trial and error to get things to where they are today.
No, congrats on all that. And congrats on your master's, congrats on your PhD, and really starting and falling into this and making this work. You said something extremely interesting about the wolf beaver dynamic, because I know in Yellowstone we talk about wolves being a keystone species, and a lot of these other beavers are one of those as well because of reshaping the rivers and the flow of everything going on in there. Did you see not just the predator prey aspect, but did you see in your research for your master's that there was non-predatory interactions between beavers, or like was there a coexistence level that was there as well, where they were keeping everything, I guess, situated well in the landscape?
So I'd say Voyageurs is very different from Yellowstone in that sense, because like in Yellowstone, the idea was that wolves came back and beavers sort of came back because of wolves' impact on elk and things like that. And elk were really preventing beavers from establishing themselves. In our area, we have an incredibly dense beaver population, and have had one for a long, long time. And so the dynamic between wolves and beavers is different. And part of that is that we also have a very different landscape where beavers can live in a lot more. They can make ponds in a lot more areas, whereas in Yellowstone, they're very much limited to certain waterways. And in Voyageurs, it's just wet everywhere. So we got tons of beavers. So it's certainly a different dynamic in that sense. Beavers, as you mentioned, are an incredibly important ecological species, and I would say arguably much more important ecologically than even wolves are. Not to downplay wolves' significance, but more just to say like beavers are crazy in the way that they transform landscapes. And in places like Voyageurs, there's been research that's shown that beavers have basically inundated 15% of the park's landscape just through their dams.
Wow.
And we're talking about a giant area, right? So they are literally transforming the ecosystem and the landscape around them. And that's one of the reasons we were interested in studying wolf beaver interactions as well, is because beavers are such an important ecological species, it would seem that predators preying on those species could be having a larger impact themselves on the ecosystem, because they might be impacting either the populations of these prey, so for example, beavers, or maybe impacting where they're actually able to start engineering and changing ecosystems. So we're really interested in understanding sort of this dynamic between an apex predator and then this ecosystem engineer, which are beavers. And that was really interesting. And it still is really interesting to understand that.
What are some maybe tangible events in more specific ways how wolves affect beaver numbers and therefore wetlands,
Sure.
For better or for worse? Were there outcomes that were studied?
So one of the big findings we've had from our work is understanding how wolves are connected to wetland formation and creation in our area. And beavers, as I just said, they're the main agent of wetland creation by building dams and things like that. And so what our work has shown is two things. One that's really interesting is that wolves don't really seem to be able to impact beaver population numbers in any significant way. And that's because beavers are pretty prolific species, and probably their populations can withstand a certain level of predation. In particular, a lot of work that's tried to understand like how do humans impact beaver populations have found that humans can typically harvest somewhere between 22 to 25 to 30% of a beaver population before that population starts to decline. And we don't think wolf predation is to that level in our area across the whole landscape. So we don't think wolves are having any impact on numbers per se. But what we have documented is that wolves are still impacting where beavers are actually able to start building and constructing wetlands. And so the key here is that understanding a little bit about beaver biology. When beavers go to create a new dam or create a new pond, or to say recolonize an old pond that maybe beavers abandoned a long time ago, typically young beavers are heading out to do this themselves. So they're traveling through little streams or across land or something to find the perfect spot. They go to build a dam or something like that. And what we found is oftentimes wolves will prey on those young beavers that are starting to create a pond. And when wolves prey on those young beavers, you basically take away the only beaver that's there to maintain the dam. And so then once the wolf kills the beaver, the dam blows because all the waters comes rushing through, and the beavers aren't there the beaver is not there to maintain it. And so in that way, wolves are impacting where beavers are actually able to engineer ecosystems. And what's particularly interesting is what we found is when a wolf kills a young beaver that's starting to create a new wetland, that wetland basically never continues on. It almost 100% of the time, it just fails and washes out. But if a wolf doesn't kill a beaver, doesn't kill the young beaver, those ponds have a really high probability of actually persisting, or those wetlands do. So they'll likely be around. So basically, wolves are one of the main mechanisms by which these newly created ponds are like ceasing to exist, I guess you could put it that way. And so in this sense, wolves are not adding, so to speak, to the diversity, but they're actually preventing it in some areas by allowing those habitats to remain exactly as they were in the first place. And so that's really cool, because when we think about that on a very local scale, like or very sort of zoomed in scale at where that pond would be, when a beaver creates a pond, it's converting a forest into a wetland. So radical changes to that little area. And so when a wolf stops that, they are in a sense sort of like the switch that's stopping this complete transformation. And so that's likely a really important thing across boreal ecosystems where wolves are eating beavers.
Have you been in a position to witness a wolf actually eating a beaver? Do they go for organs first, like they might with some other critters, or are they after the tail because of the fat content? Have you noticed? I'm just curious.
So I'd say I have never witnessed that. It would be like the most amazing thing ever. And there's only been one documented visual observation, there's been two documented visual observations of a wolf attacking a beaver that we're aware of, right? I mean, and part of the reason is that where beavers live are typically these really densely vegetated habitats. So you'd have to be in like the perfect place at the perfect time. And there's really only one video that exists of a wolf killing a beaver. And you can actually find that on YouTube. And it was just some guys who were out moose hunting in Quebec, and they got super lucky that there's this wolf in the middle of a logging road that happens to run off this logging road, grab a beaver, and come back into the middle of the road. And they're like filming it the whole time. And the wolf just doesn't care. And that's really the only observation that exists of where you can sort of study it. And we wrote a paper on that because we were like, oh, that's really cool. We need to preserve this observation. But otherwise, no. So we don't really know what they go for. I mean, ostensibly, I think that makes sense that they're going for internal organs and then also the tail. I can say for sure we've never found tail remains at a kill. Usually when they kill a beaver, they eat everything. And the tail, I can't even imagine why they would let that be, because it is pure fat almost. So I think that that makes sense. But yeah, if I saw an observation like that, I'd be blown away. Because I've kind of resigned myself to like this. We're studying something that I'll never witness, that we'll never see, no matter how much we try. I mean, even with trail cameras, we have people who are like, oh, boy, why don't you just put out a lot of trail cameras and you'll get it. And I think that sounds great in principle until you're out here and you say, holy cow, like a typical wolf has 100 to 150 beaver ponds in its territory. And then you've got to have your little camera at the right spot at the very right time to capture all of it. And it's like the odds of that are just so infinitesimal. It's not even worth us trying to do it.
I think it's hard for some folks to actually understand how hard it is to see animals. Like, even if you're in a place where there is, I mean, I personally hike in backcountry areas where there is bear sign, honestly, every 5 feet. I have yet to see a bear this year. And it's just like, it's everywhere. It's fresh. It's from this morning. It's from 2 weeks ago. So there are bears using this area back and forth constantly. And you would really be hard pressed to find one. So I applaud anyone who's doing this and getting any videos of anything. So
yeah, no, it's true. I mean, that's one of the challenges of studying wolves in a place like, the boreal forest, where it's thick, right? And you can't see anything. And that's what makes some of the research side of things, it's really what makes it fun, because you really have to get creative and there's these things going on that you want to study and you want to understand. And it seems so easy, but it's not, because you can't see them. So you've got to come up with all sorts of clever ways of how can we get data on this? What might be good evidence of this behavior? And so a lot of what we do is, is just that, coming up with creative solutions. And it's fun. I mean, there's some days where I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool if we could just watch it. But if that was the case, someone probably already would have done it. And I wouldn't, no one would be helping us do this work, because they'd be like, well, someone's already figured it out. So.
Right, exactly. Describe what a boreal forest is and the landscape that you're talking about that encapsulates Voyageurs National Park, because it seems as though it's a couple of different sections and a couple of different landscapes sort of rolled into one, with the way that beavers can manipulate the landscape as easily as they can. So just give everybody an example, or just to describe what that looks like and what you guys are dealing with on a daily basis as you do your research.
Sure, absolutely. So the boreal forest is a huge biome across North America and Eurasia through a lot of it. And so there's a lot of various habitat types within the boreal ecosystem. Where we're at in Voyageurs is on the southern edge of the boreal forest. And so we are kind of in this area where you have a lot of deciduous trees and a lot of coniferous trees. It's sort of a mix there. Whereas if you go up further north into the boreal forest, you're going to have predominantly conifers. But most boreal forest habitats are going to be densely forested. They're going to have a lot of wetlands, bogs, lowland areas. And in our area in particular, we have a lot of sort of rocky areas as well. So you have sort of these little rocky ridges that might be, 50, 100, 150 feet tall. And then in between the rock ridges are going to be lowlands. And those are the kinds of areas that beavers really like to dam up, because that's where all the water gets sort of channeled through. And so these make great areas for beavers to dam up. And then because it's rock, it holds water really well. So beavers can create a little dam and it floods a big area. And so there's a lot of water in our area. And that's true, I'd say, probably of most boreal ecosystems. There's just a lot of wetlands. And it's what makes the area so diverse and so really stunning. And also is what makes it so difficult to get around too. And so one of the other benefits about dense forests, and we're talking about sort of not being able to see wolves and things like that, is back when sort of there was nationwide extermination of wolves, or an attempt to do that. Northern Minnesota, where we're at, was the only place in the lower 48 states where wolves were never fully extirpated. And that's because it's this really impenetrable habitat that's thick and dense and hard to get through. And that likely provided a refuge for wolves that they didn't have in a lot of other areas where people had sort of changed the environment. So the way I describe Voyageurs, though, to people is it's really stunning, it's really beautiful, and it's also really tough to get around. And when people come join us in the field to see what we do, they get done with the day, and usually they're pretty tired because it's hard walking. Not because there's a lot of elevation. I worked in Grand Teton National Park and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's more just like it's a full body workout where you're constantly pushing brush and walking through bogs and stuff like that, and it's just very tiring.
Yeah, so I could be wrong, but when I'm looking at this map right now on the mm-hmm. Voyageurs site showing the dispersal of packs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I wonder if you have any insight on the question that came up for me when I looked at it, or if you guys have done any specific research. But it looks like as the packs expand, they still overlap to some degree. And based on the map, they don't skip over or travel miles and miles of territory before setting up new territories. They choose to all butt up against each other like this expanding cluster. Mm-hmm. Has there been any research into why that is, or why not travel great distances before setting up new territories? And in the context of competition and risk of conflict, the overlapping seems risky. How might it be advantageous?
So the probably the best way to think about it is that the population in northern Minnesota, because they were never fully sort of extirpated, has remained relatively intact and dense for a long time. And so and this is luckily because wolves have recolonized a lot of different areas, people have been able to sort of study how do they actually choose territories and how do they set up shop. And typically what happens is when they first start, you'll have packs starting to set up territories in the sort of ideal, the best habitats, probably where there's the most prey and things like that. But then as time goes on, younger wolves have to set up territories, or dispersing wolves have to set up territories in sort of less optimal habitats because all the good stuff has been taken. And so in places like Voyageurs, what we've seen is there's really no place that there aren't wolves. Like if you could look at our territory map and then look over all of sort of northern Minnesota, it probably would all look like that. if you could get collars on all the packs.
I see.
And so there's really nowhere to go where you're not going to be in competition with another pack. And so you do have these overlapping areas that both packs are kind of using. And this is sort of like the conflict zone, right? And there is risk for pack members and also young pups and stuff like that are in that zone. They can run into a neighboring pack and that could be it. And we definitely have documented wolves that get killed by other wolves. But there's really just nowhere else to go. And then we see new packs that are forming. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll kind of just like carve out this territory amongst existing packs that are there. And I don't know how that works sort of I don't know how that works. I don't know how wolves like tell the other ones like, we're setting up here and, everyone else can just deal with it. But we've seen it many times where there's been sort of no opening and then a pack settles and the other pack sort of adjusts to that. So it's quite fascinating. But yeah, so wolf pack formation though is really intriguing because it brings up all these questions of how does this happen? How do these wolves actually communicate and go about this? And I think that's where places like Yellowstone in particular have been very valuable for them to be able to watch encounters with other packs and things like that and gain information that in places like Voyageurs, we have no idea what's occurring other than saying like, yep, there's a new pack here, or yeah, there's a new pack here. But beyond that, we have no other knowledge about what's going on.
That's an incredible situation that you guys are in. Do you guys have a tally of, because I'm looking at the same map that Steven was looking at just before, is there a tally of the amount of packs currently there? And it seems as though the packs in Voyageurs are very small, at least from what I can gather off your website. Is that true? It's a smaller, dense, maybe it's 10 packs with 5 wolves apiece or something in that range. It seems as though the numbers are lower. And are the wolves themselves a smaller version of, say, the grays and the timbers that are 90 pounds or 100 pounds at some point?
Sure. So I'd say in terms of packs, it fluctuates and we don't have collars on, say, all of them. So we can kind of estimate, we probably have somewhere between 12 and 14 in our study area. I think this year we had 11 that we had GPS collars on, which is quite a few packs. And it's hard to study more than that, just logistically. But so typically we do have a lot of territories, but the difference between ourselves and other places, like let's say in Western US or Western North America or up in Northern Canada, is that our territories are relatively small. We have smaller pack sizes, as you mentioned, and we have smaller territories. And the pack size typically is thought to be a reflection of the size of prey that wolves are going after. So if you're a pack and your main prey is a deer, there's only so much food to go around if you kill a deer. And so you can't have these giant pack sizes because there's not going to be enough food and it will inevitably lead to conflict and things like that within the pack. So you generally have smaller pack sizes where their prey is a smaller bodied animal. And then when you get into wolves that are, say, hunting moose full time, you start getting bigger packs because that can support more members. So that's probably some of the variation we see in pack size. We do sometimes get periods of time where our pack size dips pretty low to like average of 3 wolves or something like that. And that is typically a result of pup survival. And we're starting to try to understand and getting an idea of how many wolf pups actually survive every year. But typically, those are going to be your additional pack members are going to be young of the year that sort of get added into that pack. But if they don't survive, you're going to have smaller pack sizes. And so for the past couple of years, we've had really low pup survival rates of somewhere between 10 to 20%. And so that means we're not adding a lot of wolves into these packs. And so these packs are remaining pretty small. But another way to think about it is even though we have small pack sizes, because we have smaller territories, we're still fitting in a lot of wolves in a relatively small area. So if you look at wolf densities or wolf estimates across sort of their whole range, Voyageurs would be on the very high end of wolf population densities across the world. And that's because we can fit in more wolves into this smaller area. And that's likely just because of the amount of prey in this ecosystem. And typically when you look at wolf populations as a whole, on the southern edge of wolf range, those are more productive ecosystems. There's better vegetation, longer growing seasons, so there's more prey generally. And then as you head further north, that changes and you get less dense wolf populations. So what I tell people in our area is just like, yeah, we have smaller packs, but we have more territories in the same area. Like if you looked at 500 square kilometers out in Yellowstone, that might just be a single pack's territory or something like that, or up in northern Canada, right? And in ours, that might be 5 or 6 territories fit into that area. So I'd say that's the big difference. The other thing, when you're asking about body size, we have smaller bodied wolves in our area, and that is also likely a reflection of the average prey size in this area. So typically when wolves are hunting smaller prey, they're going to be smaller bodied because they don't need to be really big and bulky to take down the smaller prey. And as wolves start hunting bigger prey, they're generally bigger body. And that's just because the bigger a wolf is, the more food it needs, the more calories it needs to keep itself going. And there probably is very little value in being bigger if you're chasing after maybe some more agile prey like a deer, where maybe being really big isn't needed. You don't need to be 100 pounds to take down a 75 kilogram deer, which is like 150 pounds. So that's likely the variation why we see smaller wolves in this area is because of what they're also eating.
Now, I don't know how often when you're doing this type of research, you are physically observing the same wolves, or enough to know where they're denning at night, for example, which might clear this question up. But with all this overlapping and these small 2-wolf packs,
Mm-hmm.
how quickly can you confidently discern a small pack of wolves versus just 2 wolves who aren't with the larger pack hunting solo for smaller prey? And I'm assuming there is a specific element of wolf behavior that makes that clear. But what is that? Like what event as you're observing wolves says to you, okay, this is clearly a singular pack of 2 wolves, not just 2 wolves from another larger pack?
Sure. No, that is an excellent question. And it's something that is really important because when you're estimating population size, you want to have some degree of confidence in what you're getting at. So the number one way we do it is we try to keep GPS collars on at least one pack member.
Okay.
And sometimes that works, usually that works well, but there are instances where, especially when you only have 2 animals, that it can be tough to get a collar on one of those 2 animals. And so the best way that we keep tabs on these animals is actually using video cameras, remote or trail cameras, that take video footage. And the technology now, those cameras are so good that it becomes really easy. I wouldn't say really, but it becomes easy to sort of recognize the individuals that you're seeing repeatedly. So you start noticing certain markings on them or certain characteristics, or, this pair has one wolf that's a lighter coat color, and then this one has a darker coat color, or something like this. And then we can know we see these wolves time and time again. And we have seen instances like this, like last year we had this pack where we knew it was there were 2 wolves that were the breeding pair for the past 5 years in that territory, and they had whittled down sort of the 2 individuals. One of them was ear tagged, and we had collared it several years ago, with the collar had fallen off as programmed. And then it was its mate. So there's 2 wolves there, and then this other pair moved in, and we kept getting this other pair on camera too. So we kept seeing these 2 different competing pairs occupying sort of the same territory, which is really weird. And then all of a sudden, the pair that had occupied it just disappeared, and we never got them on camera again. And so what we suspect is you had this sort of invading pair of wolves that wanted to take over the territory, and eventually they outcompeted this older breeding pair and took over. But the video camera footage is so good, we could know which pair it was just based on the coloration of the animals and their appearance. So that's the main way that we do it. Now, I should note, the key here is getting repeated observations of these animals, right? If you just got one observation, I would never feel confident saying there's only 2 wolves here, which is why on our territory maps, we put a little thing that says obs for the number of observations of that pack of that size that we've gotten, because that gives us a level of confidence to say if we saw it once, I'm not going to be very confident. But if we saw the same pair 14 times, feel pretty good that that's the size of the pack in that area.
Yeah, I'm noticing that. I was going to ask that question, and you answered it, so it's good. I was looking at the map, and it said wolves and obs, and I was trying to discern what that meant. Initially, it looked like when I was reading up on the project that the start of it was really trying to figure out what wolves were doing in the summertime. Was that something that kicked this off as to figure out what wolves are doing? And I guess their slower period where maybe they're not hunting as much as opposed to the winter. Is that accurate? And if so, what was the findings of that, especially in your area where it might, the temperature variations might not be so severe? Whereas in Yellowstone, they get, it gets to be really, really hot and then they get snow. And describe what that's like in Voyageurs.
Sure. So I'd say, when we started, we definitely were taking, I was focused on wolf beaver interactions, but beavers are one of the main preys during the summertime. And because we were studying wolf beaver interactions, we inevitably were studying sort of wolf predation as a whole on all sorts of other species. And so that's, in 2015, where like my goal was like, I'm gonna look at wolf beavers, but I also really wanted to understand the bigger picture too. And so that's why really the main goal was like, how do we gain as much information as we can on the summer ecology of wolves? And that meant wolf predation on deer fawns, and then also gain a lot of information on wolf reproduction, because actually during the summertime, I would say their predation behavior is probably actually more important during the summer than it might even be during the winter, because in the summer, or in the spring at least, wolves have their pups, and then they're raising their pups throughout that summer season. And food is critical to getting those pups to survive to adulthood. And so people have generally, though, only really looked at wolf predation during the winter time. And that's because wolves are quite a bit easier to study in the winter than they are during the summertime. And so we came into like, well, there's this big gap in wolf ecology that would be really good to answer. And we've got a perfect place here to answer these questions. And so that's kind of the angle we've taken with our work, to try to fill in what's going on in the summertime. In terms of, sort of our findings with our sort of summer ecology, there's a lot of things that we found about sort of wolf predation behavior and things like that. But there's a lot of really big questions that are still, open questions that we're trying to gain enough data to really answer. And part of the challenge for us is that the way that we study wolf predation is we visit everywhere a GPS collared wolf has spent more than 20 minutes in sort of a small area. The idea being that anywhere a wolf spends more than 20 minutes could be a kill site, and we need to go in there and see if we can figure out what it killed, or if it wasn't killing something, what was it doing? And so by doing that work, we're getting a lot of information on a lot of wolf sort of ecology. But the drawback is that work is really field intensive and requires a ton of effort. And so for us to study a lot of wolves and get a lot of data so we can identify patterns and trends, we need many years of data to do it, because we study about 5 to 6 wolves really intensively, for this predation behavior work every year. And to do that, we're probably putting on, as a field crew, 4,000 to 5,000 miles of hiking, just to get to these 5 animals or 6 animals. And that's really cool. Like, the data is really awesome, but it's not very much, and you only have 5 a year. So we've been doing our work for 7 years, and we've only studied, 35 animals. Well, ecosystems are very complex. So to account for all the variables that could explain sort of wolf predation behavior and things like this, we need a lot of data. And so that's one of the limiting factors. And that's probably why wolf predation has remained understudied in the summer, because of some of those difficulties.
And just on a more personal note, if I can, but something you just said about not being totally satisfied just diving into beaver and wolf dynamic and wanting to know more, it had me wanting to ask, put us in your mind as a researcher, as a biologist, what makes you want to understand the larger picture? Like, what's your personal motivation for wanting to know more about wildlife and how it all works together?
So I'd say my personal motivation is I think probably just knowledge in a sense. I think that you really, and understanding, what really happens in ecosystems. And I think particularly with wolves, I mean, obviously their individual behavior is fascinating, but understanding how do they fit into the bigger picture, and how do their dynamics with their prey fit into the whole ecosystem, makes you really want to understand it well. And then you start getting into other questions like what you guys are asking, like, why are pack sizes so small? Why are territories small? In our instance, like, why are some pups, why don't they survive? Why don't they make it? What are these things that are really impacting wolf population size? And you get, as a researcher, you get curious. You want to know, like, well, why do I notice these patterns? And what's the driving force? It's like a big puzzle. And every year you get little pieces, right? And you'll never put the whole thing together entirely, but you want to try to get as much information as you can to sort of get the best perspective. And that changes with time. When I first started, it was very much like, I had these couple questions I want to answer, and those are interesting. But then as you keep going, you notice, like, oh, there's this thing I didn't think about that now I'm really curious in, and then this other thing, and they're all connected. And so you start realizing that you really want this sort of comprehensive picture, because little bits aren't quite as satisfying. And so by trying to put it all together, it makes it a lot more, I guess, fulfilling. But then you also realize, to some extent, you're sort of chasing the wind, because you'll never be able to get all of it. Because as you start realizing how complex it is, you start realizing, wow, there's a lot of stuff we can never understand, or we'll never be able to understand, because we can't get inside the mind of a wolf. We can't understand, why are they making decisions? Why are they behaving this way? And things like that.
And speaking of that, what are some kind of flagship questions that have been unanswered to your knowledge? Like, consider a new student's listening, they're looking to formulate a thesis, and they want to know what's an exciting question to dive into. What are some problems you're aware of that just have not been solved pertaining to wolves and their impact on the ecosystem? What's still out there?
Well, I'd say one big one, and this is just for, I think one of our aims is understanding, how does predation behavior tie into pup survival in the summertime? Pup survival is probably one of the biggest things that's going to drive wolf population changes. It's a big difference if 50% pups survive versus 10%. I mean, that's a lot of wolves that will or will not be added to a population. And so the question then becomes, why do we see such variation sometimes in between different packs, and then across the population across different years? And we can look at a lot of different things and say, oh, some pups might be starving to death, which is the most common cause of death for a lot of pups. But the question is, okay, they might be starving, but why? And how much does that relate to the hunting abilities of its parents? How much does it relate to its pack? How much of it relates to prey availability? All these sort of big questions. And so tying sort of our predation behavior work to the pup side of things sort of makes it holistic, I guess, in the sense, like, you're getting the big picture of saying, like, okay, we understand what the adults are doing. We understand their behavior, and now we understand what's going on with the pups, and we can link the two. And oftentimes, or that's a really challenging thing to do, because you have to have data on both of those parts of wolf ecology, and oftentimes people don't, because it's really hard to get. So back in 2003, Dave Meach wrote this book, Dave Meach and Luigi Boitani, called Wolves, and it's sort of like the wolf Bible. And in it, there's a section on sort of wolf populations, and they said that pup survival is one of the biggest enigmas in wolf biology at that time. And I would say that that's probably not changed a whole lot since then. And that's because wolf pups are so hard to study. Like, how do you follow a wolf pup, right? And people have tried all sorts of clever ways to do it, right? Some people have put in, like, surgically implanted transmitters to try to understand it. People are trying to develop little expandable collars that can go on pups, and people do this with, like, other small animals too.
We've never heard this before. This is fascinating. I don't think we've ever heard this before, John, have we?
Oh, no, we haven't.
So, yeah, and I think the one thing is, when you look at the logistics, like, it's one of those things. It's like, oh, well, that should be easy enough to study. Like, but when you think about the mechanics of how that happens, how you study wolf pup survival, you have to have a lot of pieces of information you've got to know. And this is particularly true in forested ecosystems where you can't see wolves. You can't just go find a wolf den by watching with the spotting scope, right? You have to have some sort of tracking device to find the den. Then when you find the den, you have to be able to count the pups that are born in that pack. Then you have to have some way to track those pups through time to both figure out why are they dying, and then how many are actually surviving. And that's really hard to do, to get all of that. Now, we don't have the information on how the pups are dying per se. We have found pups that are dead from a variety of different things, but, like, we're not studying each individual pup because we don't feel comfortable with any tracking devices that currently are available. We don't feel comfortable putting that technology on pups yet. But that's where things are probably going to move at some point, as people are going to start doing that. And I know people have been trying to experiment on what would work, because that's sort of one of the keys to understanding it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we haven't heard. Yeah, Stephen, you're right. We haven't heard any of this, and knowing that this was such a lingering question, and really something that's I guess across the board in wolf biology and wolf study, that there hasn't been this study of wolf pups. Because I mean, to your point, you're right, especially where you guys are based in Voyageurs. I can't imagine you guys trying to find the den, and the amount of time and legwork literally it would take to get to where that den is, to find it and do all this research. Do you foresee, because it seems in the grand scheme of wolf bio and wolf study, Voyageurs is on the younger side in terms of it's been around for 7 years. A lot of these other studies have been around, for decades. I think of Isle Royale, I think of Yellowstone for 25 years. Do you see your project moving in any certain direction where are you guys going to try and do the wolf pup study, or is there another angle that you guys are really trying to put your name on, that you can get the information for in your specific area, that would really help the overall wolf information cycle?
So our goal is to set up our project, or to really establish it long term. And obviously, when you're doing research like ourselves, a lot of that's determined by grant funding and things like that. It's unlikely we're gonna be able to say, like, we can definitely go for 20 years or something. That's the goal, and we're going to work towards that. But there's no guarantee. Things could come up. All sorts of things could happen. But that's our goal right now, is to keep it going. And in many ways, the goal is to continue to collect a lot of the same information that we're currently collecting, and doing it year after year after year, which is what places like Isle Royale and Yellowstone do. And then we'll add in where we see fit, different side projects or things we can add into it to gain more information and data, and keep those things going. But the main value in sort of long-term ecological work is collecting the same thing year in, year out, on sort of different animals, different packs, and under different conditions, because that allows you to start to pick up on trends and patterns that you wouldn't be able to see if you did a study for 3 years or 4 years, or maybe even 6 years, right? And we can see that with places like Isle Royale, where they have data going back 60 years. And now we can see patterns in wolf and moose numbers that, if we just did it for 6 years, that would never have been possible. And so in many ways, what makes our project, I would say, different than anyone that's currently going on is no one's really studying the summer ecology of wolves in the way we are, in terms of both in the intensity and in a habitat similar to ours, where you have wolves and beavers and deer in sort of an area, and that's sort of like the summer prey. You do have studies in places like Yellowstone, but that's obviously a very different habitat. But the thing that we're trying to understand is sort of the ecosystem where you do have wolves and beavers and deer. And that ecosystem type is actually really common across North America. When we think about the amount of area where you have wolves and beavers and deer all coexisting, it's actually a pretty substantial area, ranging from Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and I'm sure other areas too. So what we're finding in Voyageurs likely is going to apply to a variety of other areas in North America, which we think is exciting, and is obviously going to become even more prevalent too, as climate change continues to happen and deer start moving further north into Canada, and occupying sort of habitats that they haven't before. And so our hope is to really, get a good picture of what's going on, and that will be helpful to other people as changes start happening.
Yeah, I noticed that on the website, when you read about the project, really at the bottom, when you talk about the boreal ecosystem, that this information, this research really can almost be groundbreaking for those environments and those different places, as you said, because I believe you touched on North America, but I believe also Asia, right, has some of these boreal ecosystems. And so this could be the place where people go who maybe aren't studying it right now, but they can get sort of an inside look at what you all are doing at Voyagers so they can translate that into their ecosystems and almost give them not a leg up, but you're helping the next group who may want to study this in a different situation.
100%. Yep, absolutely. And same thing with a lot of our work with on wolves and beavers. Beavers occur across all of or a large portion of northern North America, but then also through Eurasia as well. And so actually the area that wolves and beavers co-occur is massive. And so that's where a lot of our work here is also likely very applicable. So like we found that wolves are altering where beavers can create wetlands in our area. Well, the way that wolves do that is very simple. They just kill beavers. And by killing beavers effectively, they're impacting wetlands. Well, that's likely happening everywhere that wolves and beavers are co-occurring. Now, people haven't been able to document that because no one's really studied it. But I guarantee if people start studying it and doing what we do here, they're going to figure out like, oh my goodness, like that's happening in other places as well. It might differ in the frequency of how often it happens or where it happens, but I almost guarantee it is happening. And so that's the kind of stuff that our project can add is identifying these things and helping show other people like how could you actually get at this in your area.
All these incredible discoveries, and the sense I get from all of our conversations is that the primary importance of researching wildlife and all this high tech and expensive research at that is that it either directly or indirectly helps to protect the species. Any species, we could talk about any species in that context, but in the case of wolves specifically, all this biology, decades of commitment, groundbreaking discoveries, and still we can't seem to coexist with the species. We're still arguing about whether it's possible. How does that feel as a contributor to that important research?
So I'd say that's a good question. That starts getting on the human dimension side of things almost, because a lot of that is actually probably less a wolf-related issue and more of a human-related issue in terms of how people view wolves and how people, culturally we live with them and think about them and things like that. And I would say that what our project is doing, I'd say a lot of our research, it's hard to say exactly how that fits into that, right? Because I'm pretty convinced you can tell people all sorts of factual information, but that doesn't change people's perspectives necessarily. And so the question then becomes, well, how do you change perspectives? And so that's a lot of what our project does with actually a lot of our outreach and education on social media is trying to share information in a way that's accessible, enjoyable, and that doesn't feel like it has any particular bias, I guess, behind it. Because I think, we work in an area where most people, if you polled the people in our study area and said, are you a big fan of wolves? I guarantee most people would say no. Right. And that's probably true of a lot of places where people are studying wolves. And through doing our work here, what we've found is that might be true that you have people who might not like wolves per se, or might not be big fans, but it doesn't mean that they're closed-minded necessarily. But they do want someone that they feel can give them honest, reputable information and who's not coming at them from any particular angle to try to convince them. And so what our project has really tried to do is really focus on sharing information in a really unbiased way, where we don't get involved in a lot of the things that can make wolves polarizing to people. And so we stay out of a lot of the management related discussions, which are undoubtedly important, but for the sake of what we're doing, the research specifically, our research doesn't say a lot about what's the best way to manage wolves in terms of our values. Not saying it's unimportant, but there's lots of people who are happy to advocate for wolves in terms of the value of wolves and things like that. There's not very many people who are out there who are researchers who are simply talking about the biology and sharing that in a way that the general public can grasp it. And also that's an enjoyable. And so that's what we've really tried to do on our project through our outreach is really share as best as we can an objective perspective of wolves, and let that sort of speak for itself. And I think honestly, that's really done wonders in our area for people who I know people who, when we started our project, I'd say hated wolves is probably the word I would use. And I know one person in particular who was a landowner who I know shot one of our wolves illegally back when we started. And then through time, they followed us on social media. Their grandson follows us on social media and whatever. And this is someone who I kind of knew was out there, was kind of afraid to talk to them. I was like, this person hates wolves. And the first time we met them, they told us how much they don't like wolves. And that's fine. Last year, I contacted them because our wolves kept going on their property that they own, and just said like, hey, like, I kind of was getting ready to get reamed. I was like, hey, can we go on your property to study wolves? And the guy was super friendly. He's like, oh yeah, absolutely. We follow you on social media. It's really cool. Like, just don't go by our deer stands. And it's like, okay, sounds good. Right. And it's like, that is like a total 180 from like, I hate wolves. I don't like you people, to like, yeah, come do your work. Like, and that's not through us trying to convince them that wolves are important or valuable or they need to love them. It's just us sharing our work. And so that's really where we focused, is like trying to change opinions through sort of education that way. And some people don't like that. They want us to be out advocating that. That's how they think we're going to change. And we know some people don't like us because we're not going to get involved in that, but we still think we're having a positive impact, even if we're in the sense of giving people a realistic perspective of wolves. And that's our goal.
Seems like a totally undervalued approach to communication, just delivering the information that you're discovering, that you're confident in, without argument, in a focused manner, without having to illustrate why people who might not like what you do are wrong. And I think that's underappreciated, and we need more of that.
Absolutely. I agree.
I agree with Steve, and I agree with you too. I think whatever you're doing and Voyageurs is doing, you're clearly just conveying the information. And sometimes that's good. And it's just, like you said, there's no political agenda behind it. There's no bias. This is the work we're doing. This is the information we want to give to everybody. And, we're going to promote the website, obviously, in just a couple minutes so you guys can look at it. But your website is laid out beautifully. It's very bright. It's very vibrant. I mean, when you go on the homepage, you see trail camera footage of wolves going across. And so it's very inviting. I think the information's laid out extremely well. Yep. You have conveyed everything really poignantly and beautifully to Stephen and me today. We've learned a couple things that we didn't know about, which is great. So I think, kudos to you, Tom, and your entire team. It's only been 7 years, but you guys really seem to be on the right track in whatever you're doing, and you're breaking new ground and new territory. Because when I looked at it, I was like, I thought I've heard of Voyageurs before, but I wasn't really sure. And it just seems like this unique situation that doesn't exist anywhere else. But now I realize it exists in a lot of places in North America, so it's not that unique. But just from what you were describing, I was like, wow, there's all these different things.
I think it's unique in the sense that it's not where a lot of us think of iconic wolf research going on. And part of that's probably due to a variety of things. One of it is probably like, the places that we all, at least when I grew up, when you think about like watching wolf documentaries or learning about wolf research, right? It's in Yellowstone, it's up in Alaska, it's up in northern Canada, Ellesmere Island or something, right? These remote, challenging places to get to that are also pretty open and wild. And Minnesota, where we're at, is like, it's a very cool area, but it's like a lot of northern Minnesota. It's like the Boundary Waters. It's like Ontario. And those places don't get quite as much attention, even though there's been wolf research going on in these places, these kinds of environments for a long time, especially during the winter time. It's just not what you're going to see on documentaries and things like that. And so in some sense, it is unique in that way. And I think one thing that's helped us is just trail cameras, for example, have really allowed us to take wolves to take the wolves in the woods and sort of make it accessible to the public. And that, before recently that really wasn't possible. And so it was, people couldn't get those insights and they couldn't be shared. And we're able to, because of the technology, now share that. And I think it's made it seem like, oh my gosh, there's this new thing that's out there, and it's been there all along. We just haven't been able to sort of tap into it because there's been no way to do it. So I think we're also lucky with where sort of our projects come in with the technological advances, because 20 years ago, the work we're doing just wouldn't have been possible. There wouldn't have been GPS collars, there wouldn't have been cameras, and you would have been kind of stuck. Like if you want to do stuff in the summer, you'd just be like, I don't know, we'll go around looking for scats or something, that's the best you could do. So we're very lucky with when we're doing the project as well.
Yeah, I think it's making an impact. It seems that way for sure. Just I have my final question for you, and then I really want to promote the website and the social media and stuff because I want to get all of your work out there. So my final question for you is, when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
I think when I hear the word wolf, what comes to mind is just wilderness, wild places. That's, I think, what it really means to me. That doesn't mean that wolves don't exist in a lot of places that aren't so wild, where there are people and people have really impacted the landscape. But, when I think of wolves, and a lot of my, I'd say, seminal experiences with wolves, studying them, have been in places that feel wild and untouched, where people they have impacted the ecosystems, but they've either recovered or you can't see those impacts as clearly. And so it makes it feel just, I don't know, more primitive or primal or something like that, to like be in areas where there's wolves. So that's what it means to me. I think even more than the animal, it's sort of what they represent in terms of the ecosystems they inhabit. And that's what I value, because I think even more than I like wolves, I like wild spaces, and wolves are an integral part of that, as are beavers, as are moose, bears, all of it, right? Intact ecosystems.
Yep.
You guys have a very unique and incredible ecosystem there.
Yeah.
And if I ever get a chance, I want to go up there. Even if I can't see any wolves, I'd love to see Voyageurs in and of itself. It sounds absolutely stunning.
We have to go.
Today.
We have to go. This is not about
oh no, we are
whether we get a chance. We're going.
Just come in the fall when there's not any bugs. You come in the summer, you might be like, what's wrong with this Tom guy? He lied to us, But the fall, it's amazing. Summer, not so much.
October or something, or what's the best?
I think late September is awesome.
Late September.
Colors are beautiful. Bugs are gone. Usually it's pretty decent temperatures.
Next year.
But there are people who come in June and July and August, which is the peak vacation months. And I can tell you, that is brutal time to be out. And there's a reason everyone comes to Voyageurs, to go on the water. And that's because the water's pretty, but it also is because there's not bugs on the water.
That's it. September.
Yeah.
September of 22. Here we come. We're going to Voyageurs. So Tom, we're doing it. I mean, we got 4 or 5 invitations. We're going to be going. We're traversing the country at some point when all this stuff dies down. Tom, give everybody the website for Voyageurs, the social media, all the stuff where they can find all this wonderful information that you guys are talking about.
Absolutely. So you can find more about our project at voyagerswolfproject.org, or just Google Voyageurs Wolf Project. I think it's probably the first thing that comes up. And then we have multiple social media accounts. We've got a Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then also YouTube account. We update our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram about 2 to 3 times a week with updates ranging from all over the place, from videos to photos to maps and various things like that. And then on our YouTube channels are all of the videos that we've made on our project. So, and you can find all of this on our social media. We've got links to all of them there, or just type in on whatever platform you prefer, Voyageurs Wolf Project, and you'll be able to find us.
Looking at
nice.
it. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, Steven's already looking at it. We're going to look at it. We're going to promote this. You got it. Tom Gable, this is great, man. Thank you so much for the quick turnaround, coming on. The great stuff you guys are doing. And yeah, plan on a visit from Steven and myself at some point in the fall next year. So looks like we're going to head out there.
All right. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sir,
Tom Gable. Yeah, you guys go check out all those websites and give them a look. They got a lot of great stuff. How's to all of you out there, and we'll speak with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.